I've been stuck, absolutely at a standstill when it comes to picking my favorite laptop. All of last year, I used the Dell XPS 15-inch in conjunction with my MacBook Pro. The XPS ended up being my favorite laptop of last year, and I actually recently sold it a few months back only because I had hopes that they were going to refresh it and give me a better model. Fast forward to present state, and I have a new love. You see, I've been using the 15-inch Surface Book 2 for about a month now, and let me just tell you. Damn! I was a huge fan of the original Surface Book. In fact, I almost thought about ditching my MacBook Pro at the time, but the fact that it didn't have a dedicated GPU really hurt me. Then, Microsoft surprised the world and they released the Performance Edition, which actually had a decent GPU inside the base. Unfortunately though, despite having a GTX GPU inside the base, the dual-core ultra-low power CPU really held that computer back. But now, we have a 15-inch, 8th generation 8650U processor with 16 gigs of RAM, a dedicated GTX 1060 GPU with 6 gigabytes of VRAM, and really good battery life. Despite this being an ultra-low powered CPU, Microsoft and Intel have just worked some magic and it's able to hold its own against my 2016 MacBook Pro, which really just blew me away, and I wanted to give you guys a comparison. My MacBook Pro is rocking a quad-core 6920 HQ processor with boost up to 3.8 GHz. Now in comparison, the Surface Book 2 is also a quad-core processor with boost up to 4.2 GHz. My MacBook Pro has 16 gigs of RAM and the Radeon 460 with 4 gigs of VRAM. Price-wise, both of these laptops are pretty equivalent and they're very pricey. The MacBook Pro is around $3,400, at least the model that I have, and then the Surface Book 2 is about $3,300 for the model that I have. Both of these computers are rocking 16 gigs of DDR3 RAM. The biggest difference here is the MacBook Pro has 2133 MHz RAM, while the Surface Book 2 has 1866 MHz RAM. Alright, so now that you know the specifications of these bad boys, let's go ahead and take a look at the design of these beauties. The Surface Book 2 is made of magnesium, which is extremely durable and feels amazing. The Surface Book 2 is relatively light, coming in at just over 4 pounds. However, it's not the thinnest 15-inch laptop around. This is due mostly to the thickest point where the fulcrum hinge rests. This hinge is legendary and functions beautifully. Actually, the whole design of the Surface Book 2 screams premium. In comparison, the MacBook Pro has set the benchmark when it comes to premium laptops for a while now. Being made of aluminum, weighing just over 3 pounds, and being half the thickness of the Surface Book 2, the MacBook Pro is one of the most portable workstations you can buy. Currently, my MacBook Pro is colored with one of Colorware's new cloak skins, which I think is pretty cool. You can check the description for more information and also a link to purchase one for yourself. Between these two designs, it's really tough to decide. The MacBook Pro steals the show when it comes to being the most portable option, but it's not by much. Plus, I do love the space gray color, I can't lie. However, the Surface Book lineup has always screamed premium, and the Surface Book 2 just continues to build on that legacy. The magnesium build is definitely a top-notch choice in terms of build materials, and that's where I think the Surface Book 2 wins in terms of having the best build quality. The displays on each of these laptops are really good. The Surface Book 2's PixelSense display has a resolution of 3240 by 2160. It produces around 98% of the sRGB and 75% of the Adobe RGB color gamuts. This of course could vary based on factory calibration and of course other things. My Surface Book 2 reaches around 412 nits of brightness, which is usable 99% of the time, but steer clear of direct sunlight or areas where there are a ton of glare. One of the key features of the Surface Book lineup is the ability to detach the display and use it as a tablet. The operation is seamless and it can be activated by a simple press of a button. The display is a 10-point multi-touch G5 display that supports 4,096 points of pressure with the new Surface Pen. Oh yeah, and it also supports the Surface Dial just like the Performance Base Edition. All of these things make for the ultimate 2-in-1 experience, giving you complete flexibility and possibility for creating content. The only downside I found to the Surface Book 2's display is this weird flickering issue that occurs whenever the GPU is under heavy load. Switching things over to the MacBook Pro, it features the infamous Retina display with a lesser resolution of 2880 by 1800. It gets brighter than the Surface Book 2 at 450 nits, and it produces 100% of the sRGB and 78% of the Adobe RGB color gamuts. This means that color accuracy on the MacBook Pro is going to be a little bit better than the Surface Book 2. The special feature of the MacBook Pro is the Touch Bar, which is a secondary OLED display used for picking various options and selections depending on the application you're using. Some people might find this useful, but for me, I've had this thing for over a year and I barely use it. The displays on both of these laptops are great, but honestly, if I had to pick one, I'm gonna go with the MacBook Pro. It doesn't have that weird flickering issue, and despite it having a lesser resolution, it gets brighter and it's more color accurate. The keyboards on both of these laptops are completely different. The Surface Book 2 features chiclet style keys that have pretty good travel. The keys are a bit soft, however they're very quiet. The typing experience is very enjoyable, and I prefer this over the MacBook Pro's Gen 2 butterfly switches. The keyboard on the MacBook Pro has no travel, and in my opinion is the worst keyboard design I have ever used simply because of durability. I've had to exchange my MacBook Pro twice in a year because of a faulty keyboard, because of the Gen 2 butterfly switches. Basically, one key failed completely, couldn't tap it no more, got no response, it was awful. I exchanged it, it worked good for about a week, the same thing happened, and I had to exchange it again. It drove me crazy. The port selection on these laptops is extremely different. The Surface Book 2 is more traditional, and I have to say at this current point in time is a bit more practical. It features two USB 3.0 ports, a UHS 2 SD card slot, a headphone jack, the proprietary Surface Connect port, and a USB-C 3.1 Gen 1 port. The MacBook Pro is more future-proof with its 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, however that means you have to carry more adapters and dongles if you're trying to connect anything as simple as an SD card. Honestly, I don't have a problem with the ports of the MacBook Pro, but it is annoying that I have to carry more stuff with me in order to create content on the road. So if I want to connect, say, an SD card to my MacBook, I have to bring a dongle. If I need USB ports for any reason, I have to bring a dongle. It's kind of annoying. And going back to the Surface Book 2, I wish that USB-C 3.1 port was Thunderbolt 3 instead, or at least Gen 2. It's kind of annoying that it's only Gen 1. When it comes to sound, the Surface Book 2 has front-facing speakers located on the display itself, which sound really good, especially for a Windows laptop. However, they're no match in terms of overall fullness to the MacBook Pro. The Surface Book 2 speakers are just loud, they lack depth, which the MacBook Pro delivers in both loudness and depth. In this day and age, security and privacy are definitely important, and each of these computers handles these things a little bit differently. With the MacBook Pro, you have Touch ID, which integrates great into macOS, making shopping through the Safari browser and accessing your passwords a breeze. Meanwhile, the Windows Hello facial recognition on the Surface lineup is game-changing and so much more convenient to get into your computer. I just wish that it integrated as nice as Touch ID. Both of these computers are using NVMe PCIe SSDs, which means that they're going to be extremely fast when it comes to accessing your documents, files, pictures, or anything that you have saved. The MacBook Pro came in between 1,800 and 1,950 for the read and writes. The Surface Book was able to reach speeds between 2,000 and 2,500 for the reads and 1,000 to 1,500 for the writes. The speeds on the Surface Book 2 were much more inconsistent versus the MacBook Pro, however, it still was fast enough to get the job done, and I don't think you're going to notice a difference. In terms of overall raw performance, I personally think the results are very interesting. For professional test, I took a 2-minute 10-bit Cineform 4K project and exported it to H.264 and DaVinci Resolve on both computers. The Surface Book was able to do this in 5 minutes and 3 seconds, while the MacBook Pro took 1 minute and 29 seconds. I then took the same footage and created a 4K timeline in Premiere Pro with the same H.264 export. The Surface Book 2 did this in 5 minutes and 52 seconds, while the MacBook Pro took 4 minutes and 44 seconds. I then went back into Resolve and took the same timeline and added lens blur, lens flare, and 10 steps of noise reduction to all 9 clips. The Surface Book 2 did this in 6 minutes and 34 seconds for the export, and the MacBook Pro did this in 11 minutes and 36 seconds for the export. Really? I don't understand what happened here. I repeated the same exact thing in Premiere Pro minus the noise reduction, and the Surface Book 2 did this in 9 minutes and 31 seconds, and the MacBook Pro took 7 minutes and 20 seconds. Kinda mind-blowing. These results were extremely surprising, and honestly, I repeated them several times and got similar if not the same results, so I have no idea what was going on. Where the Surface Book 2 really shines is in the GPU department because the 1060 is extremely powerful. That's not to say the Radeon 460 isn't powerful, but we all know the 1060 is a little bit more powerful than the 460. I didn't do any tests inside of Final Cut because there's nothing on the Surface Book 2 that I can really compare it to, plus Final Cut Pro 10 does not support Cineform. Moving things over to gaming, the Surface Book 2 was able to game like a boss. In terms of exact frame rates, I'm getting anywhere between 50 to 60 frames per second, depending on the game and of course the settings. I recommend dropping the resolution to around 1080p or 2K to get the best performance. Plus, a welcome addition to the Surface Book 2 is the ability to connect to Xbox wireless controllers that use the Xbox Controller Sync feature rather than the standard Bluetooth. Gaming on the MacBook Pro just isn't ideal because there's not a lot of titles that support Mac OS. Now, of course, you could boot camp the MacBook Pro and then you might get interesting results, or you could use NVIDIA's GeForce Now, which will link to computers over a server, but just out of the box, it's not going to be a good experience. Both of these laptops are stellar, and if I didn't depend on Final Cut Pro 10 so much, I would switch in a heartbeat to the Surface Book 2. This brings me to one of the biggest things to consider when trying to decide between these two amazing computers, which is what OS do you want? Windows 10 is very reliable and much more open than macOS High Sierra. On the flip side to that, Apple has incredible apps that are macOS specific, like Final Cut Pro 10, that make the experience even better. I plan on making some more Surface Book 2 content, like finding out if it can handle an 8K project. Like, can I export and edit 8K footage on an ultra low powered processor? I don't know. If you don't want to miss that video, make sure you go ham on that like button and stick around by subscribing, and then click on that bell icon so you can be alerted when that video drops. Before I go, I want to ask you guys a question. Is there anything in specific you want to see in terms of content on the Surface Book 2 15-inch? Also, what other laptops are worth checking out that you want to see some coverage on? Let me know by leaving a comment down below. And of course, I'll talk to you guys in the next one.